And then we're going to have a column that is going to pull all these together, which is our non-linguistic representation.
They know what that is. I like to use that on.
We'll call it, and why is temperature important? Why should we know about what the temperature of our bioswale is?
It's freaking hot.
Because, what's that? Dissolved oxygen. So,
all right, and all you know this, go ahead and draw what you're going to draw. All you know this because you take a can of soda, you got to keep it cold to keep the CO2 in there. If you open a hot can of soda, what's it going to do? Those CO2 dissolved gas are going to try to get out of that solution as fast as it can, right? But if it's cold, it just goes bubble, 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 right?
Bubble,
but
bubble,
if it's hot, it's whoosh. But if it's cold, it goes
Temperature what?
bubble, bubble, bubble. But if it's hot, it goes whoosh. You guys know this, right?
Temperature, when colder, can hold more dissolved oxygen. pH is our next line. Why should we know about pH? What does pH tell us about our water quality? The acidity, or how basic it is as well. And how is that important to plants and other organisms that live in the water? Acid rain, for example. What's the pH of acid rain?
Anything below a 5.6 on the pH scale, 7 being neutral. Going down, the more acidic, the more you go down, the more acidic it gets. I think a lemon is like a 2.4. But if you're down below 5.6, then you're stressing plants and animals out. We have a buffering system in us that keeps our pH right at about a 7.1. Buffering, that means when we start to become more acidic, our natural body systems will crank some base in there and balance us out. If it doesn't, you know what you get? When your pH goes out of whack, you get halitosis. You know what halitosis is? Anybody? Nobody knows what halitosis is? It's bad breath. So you better hope you got good buffers, especially if you want a kiss for homecoming.
Gross.
Gross.
Can you read that?
Oh yeah, sorry. My writing's kind of small here because I'm trying to pack it in here. But a pH between 5.6 and 7.5 is better for the chemical balance in organisms. A lot of what we're trying to test for with water quality is to try and see how suitable the habitat is for organisms. So in addition to fish, and trying to find the presence of that, we're also, as we move through the semester this year, we're going to talk a lot about macroinvertebrates, because even now within state agencies like the Department of Environmental Quality, they're looking less and less at just these and actually are starting to use macroinvertebrates, which are what salmon and other organisms eat, as actually the indicator, because they showed the collection of all these working together to support species. So today we're starting to understand how these things help organisms like macroinvertebrates. As we go through the school year, we'll actually get into understanding what macroinvertebrates tell us. Anyway, but that's why, this all comes back to things living. What can live within these systems and these watersheds that we love so much. So conductivity, who knows what conductivity is all about? Other than just the fact that this light is conducting electricity. No, not necessarily the flow, but something about what's suspended in the water that might help conduct.
All right. Let me play on something you already know. Did I do electrolysis of water in here the other day?
Yeah.
Okay, and it didn't work. It was really slow while it was just pure water. What did I dump in it?
Salt.
Salt. A solute, something that dissolved in it, increased the conductivity and then allowed for electrolysis to take place in a faster rate. That's what we're talking about here.
Exactly.
That's what conductivity is all about. Solutes dissolved into our water.
Yeah.
Whether it's NaCl or whatever other type of salt.
It's important to understand conductivity because what is dissolved in your water is ultimate. If you have a bunch of heavy metals or a bunch of salts, for example, that have come from runoff, then you know that you're getting a really high input of those things. You don't want too high of this because, once again, like with our pH, these organisms are absorbing all these things, and so we want a balanced scenario where they're not getting too much of this conductivity or too high or low levels of pH. So over here to our Pictionary station, or part of our data sheet, because as many of you know, I love to draw. I'm going to draw a little example of what we're going to talk about as relates to our bioswale and the plants that ultimately are planted in the bioswale that have really, I've been really happy to see have been taken off since we planted them in the lab. We've got not only a higher pH and heavy metals, but that ultimately comes down here, and when it hits our spirea, which has got this nice deep root system, what do you think it does? Does it go straight into the bioswale? What's that? It filters it. It actually holds the water for longer. And as it holds that water, it ultimately, through sunlight and through absorbing not only the acid rain, but also the heavy metals that run off into it, through the process of taking in carbon dioxide and letting out oxygen, it actually will filter a lot of these things that ultimately were put there because of us. So in the end, this water that comes out of here from the plants back into here might be more like a 7. Or, whatever, depending on how much time and how many plants it's had to go through, it probably will be closer to the pH that we want. Now, what else in addition to providing a filtering system for our bioswale, what also does this spirea do by virtue of hanging over our bioswale, the water there? Cools it down. So the temperature also stays lower, what else does that help with? Yep, exactly. So this plant has already served 1, 2, here we breathe, 3, and 4 functions. So ultimately, these are very important things to have as we try and figure out how we're going to make sure that the way in which we're living with this place is at the most equilibrium. And that's what plants and animals all need, is they need things to be not like this all the time, though nature does that, but they need more like this. And that's where having more plants and like that helps keep our system a little more equilibrium.
A buffering.
A buffering, exactly.
Keep it within a range that is acceptable and doesn't give these crickets and newts bad breath.
There you go.
You following me? They got to stay within their limits too. All right.
So now on to our data collection.